Okay, I think we're back, maybe. I'm Shamaree. I'm a marriage and family therapist turned intimacy coach and relationship expert. I empower women to be fully uninhibited and fulfilled in their intimate and sexual relationships. And we are back for another live. Today we are going to be talking about communication. So I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks to help you better communicate. Whether this is with an intimate partner, friends, family, whomever, these tips apply to all relationships. Hello, as you are coming in. Hopefully my connection is a little bit better. I had some trouble connecting initially, but hopefully we're good here. If you have questions or anything along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if you are watching this on the replay, you can hashtag replay and still drop a comment below. I do my best to answer all of them. So definitely let me know if you have questions about anything that I say, or if you feel like maybe something was left out that you need clarity on. But today, like I said, we're going to talk about communication. So I have 5 tips and a little bonus. If you make it all the way to the end, then you'll be able to hear all of them. And hopefully this will help you immensely with your relationships. So number one, and I do have my notes here to make sure I hit all the points, but the number one thing that I am going to suggest when it comes to communication is making sure that when you're having difficult conversations or serious conversations, important conversations, that you're doing so at a neutral time and in a neutral space. And what I mean by that, as far as neutral time, so you want to make sure that this is at a time where you're not in a heightened emotional response, where you're not super overwhelmed, where you're not super angry, making sure that as much as possible, we're humans, we can't take emotions away, but we don't want to be at a super heightened space, right? So as much as you can, neutral time, neutral space. As far as the space is concerned, what I mean by that is you don't want to be like, if you're having a conversation and it's about your sex life, you don't want to be maybe in the bedroom in the middle of trying to practice foreplay or trying to get something started, because that is not neutral time. That's not a neutral space. So that makes people a little bit more vulnerable when you're in those spaces. And usually when we're a little bit more vulnerable, we're a little bit more aware, like hyper aware, and we can be on defense, especially if someone's saying something that's negative, right? So we can be a little bit more sensitive to those things. So that's why we say neutral time, neutral space as much as possible. That's going to be number one. So before you even have the conversation, you're already trying to set yourself up for success. So making sure that you're choosing the right time and place to have the conversation is of high importance. So that's why that's number one. Number 2, and we've all heard this before, but I'm going to say it again, use I statements. I statements keep the focus on you, because you can only know your perspective. You can only know how you feel about things. So you only need to speak about how you are feeling and what you're experiencing. I statements allow you to do that. And it also helps to avoid having the other person feel like you're attacking them. Because when you're saying you, it feels very much like an attack. And when people feel attacked, they are defensive. When people are defensive, we cannot and will not think clearly. And we're not going to try to problem solve at all. If we're defensive, we're just trying to protect ourselves, right? We're trying to make sure that we are not being hurt. And sometimes when we get in that space, we start to hurt others, because that is how we defend ourselves, right? And so we want to avoid all of that. And a way that you can do that is by using I statements. I feel like you don't show me this, or you don't do this. I feel upset when you don't listen to me the first time I say something. I feel like I don't matter because you don't pay attention to me. So it's all about how I feel and what I'm observing, what I see, what I experience, and this is how I feel about it, this is how I think about it. So I feel unwanted because whenever I try to initiate affection with you, you seem to not care. So letting them know, like, okay, this is something that you're doing, but this is how I feel about it, and mostly my interpretation. And you could be wrong, and that's why we use I statements. You might not be right about what it means or what they're intending to do. do. So we want to use those I statements. Hello, hello for everyone coming in. So we are going over communication tips. I went over 2 so far. So the first one was neutral time and space. Anytime that you're having a serious conversation, an important conversation, or a difficult conversation, whether this is with a partner, a friend, family member, even someone at work, you want to make sure as much as possible we are at a neutral time and space so that we are having this conversation when people are not already in a heightened state of stress. Number 2 was I statements. We want to make sure that we're focusing on ourselves and our experience of things so that we are sharing our perspective, but also as much as possible trying not to put the other person on defense. We're not trying to attack the other person, because if we're having the conversation, clearly this is something that's important to us, right? It's something that matters, and we wouldn't have the conversation if we didn't care about maintaining the relationship. So we want to make sure that we're very aware of how we're going about it so that we're not creating a further issue along the way. So that's number 2 is I statements. Number 3 is going to be avoid generalizations. And this is something that I used to struggle with a lot, so I know it's very, very easy to do. And by generalizations, I mean you never take me on dates. You never get me nice things. You always forget to do the dishes. You always forget to do this, or you always say mean things. So always, never, those sorts of things. And this is something that you want to avoid because in general, I always give this example, and it's an extreme example, but it kind of shows you what I'm talking about. So sociopaths, anytime you watch those, like if you're into crime, criminology and that sort of thing, when you watch those documentaries, a lot of times you'll hear interviews of people saying, oh, well, he was so charismatic, he was so nice, he was so sweet. Whenever I met him, I would never think that he would do these horrible things, right? So these people have done terrible things, right? Very, very terrible, like the most extreme things that you can do, right? But then they still had these instances where they were sweet, charismatic. So no one is ever always one way. No one ever in creation is always one way. So that's why we want to avoid the generalization, because it discredits the times that they did listen. So maybe they only listened 1 or 2 times when you asked them to do something the first time, but that shows that they don't always ignore you, because they did listen those 1 or 2 times. So we want to make sure we don't discredit someone, because if we do, that makes them less likely to want to continue to work on it, right? Because if they're not going to get credit for it anyway, if you're not going to acknowledge it anyway, why am I doing it? So we don't want to do that. And like I said, no one is always one way. Even if it feels like it, it's not true. And then hopefully, I hope that all of my people in my community here, that you are all at least at a baseline where you respect yourself and you care about yourself. So if you are with someone who is always ignoring you or never doing things that make you feel special, and all of those things, if they're really like that all of the time, then you have to really analyze why you're there in the first place. And so I'm hoping that you're not in that situation. If you are, then you can definitely still send me a DM and I can try to help you find resources so that we can get you out of that. Any abusive or toxic situations you feel that you do not or cannot get out of. But unless it's that, no one is always one way. And so if they are, then that's on you to get out of it, right? It's not on them. You can't expect them to change. We can't change people, right? And so if they are always that way, like really, which I doubt, you shouldn't be with them, right? And so that's going to be number 3, is avoiding the generalizations. Hey. Number 4 is going to be one issue at a time, okay? And this, again, something else that I had trouble with myself, so I get it. Trust me, I've been there. But you do want to avoid talking about many things at a time. And I know it's very easy to do. Be like, and you also do this. And what about this? And because we allow things to pile up over time, and then now we're throwing 100 things at you. This makes it very, very difficult for someone to follow along. It can be very, very overwhelming. But then it also clouds your point. So if you're telling me all of these million things at one time, I'm losing the point. And then it also, like I mentioned earlier, it feels like an attack. So if I feel attacked, I'm concerned with defending myself. I no longer really care about what your point even is. I'm going to defend myself against whatever it is that you're saying. So we're not going to problem solve. We're not going to come up with a great solution that works for everyone, because now I feel like you're trying to put everything on me, and I'm just going to guard myself against those things that you're saying. So one issue at a time. Even if they did 10 things wrong, we're going to focus on the one thing at a time so that we can work through that one thing, and then we can move forward with the next thing. And sometimes that's not within the same conversation. Sometimes it's not even within the same day, and that's okay. As long as we're making it clear, like, okay, we'll have another conversation. We'll check in on another day or another time if it gets overwhelming. So create a plan for it, but definitely don't try to jumble it all in one conversation, because it makes it very, very difficult to work through. Hello. And number 5, I'll review all of them afterwards, but number 5, what I have here, and we probably all heard this kind of goes along with communication not only being about what you're saying, or even what you're doing, because there's nonverbal communication too, right? So it's not only about that, it's also the other side, understanding and listening, right? And so you might have heard listen to understand rather than listening to reply. And this is something that's very hard to do, because as someone's saying something, we are thinking about things that we want to say in response. So one thing that you can do to kind of slow that down is to ask clarifying questions. So before you respond, before you address anything that they're saying to you, after you've heard what they said, ask questions about it. So did you mean this? Well, when you mentioned stress, what are you referring to? When you mentioned lack of affection, what are you referring to? Just because that affection can mean many different things to different people. So for some people, that can be like the simple things like, oh, just being able to hold hands or to hug or to have a quick kiss here or there. And for some people, they may be saying affection and they mean you don't initiate sex. So you need to ask these questions, clarify. So what do you mean by that? And that allows you space and time to not focus on what you're saying at all, but to truly understand what it is that they're saying. And once you fully understand what they're saying, you're super clear on what all of the words mean, and what actions or things that they're referring to in regards to your specific relationship, then we can respond. And at that point, it makes it a little bit more helpful for you to kind of come up with a solution, because you are, as best you can, you're fully understanding their perspective, and you already know yours. Like, you know how you feel about it, so it makes it a little bit easier to progress the conversation rather than going in circles and kind of going against one another. Because ultimately, if you're in a relationship, romantic or otherwise, it's about the people working together in order to make that relationship thrive. So again, listening to understand, asking those clarified questions, taking time before you respond, and then also on the other side of that, allowing the other person to have that time and that space before they respond as well. And I really struggled with this. Like, if you're not responding quickly enough, I feel like you're not listening and you don't care. And so I had to learn, like, some people need a little bit more time to process what it is that you're saying before they can respond to it, so that they can respond in the most thoughtful and helpful way. So it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's not that they don't care or they're tired of me talking. It could be they just need time to process what I'm saying. So when I mention these tips, yes, you need to be doing these things, but also allow the other person time and space to do the same. And so going over the 5 tips again, and then we'll get to the bonus that I mentioned. So 5, number 1, neutral time and space. So whenever you're having these conversations, whether they're difficult, important, serious, stressful, however you would determine the conversations, you wanting to make sure that you're doing those at a neutral time and within a neutral space. So not when you're stressed, not when you're already naked about to have sex, maybe not even immediately after, if that's not a time that you're back at baseline. that might not be a good time. Not after there's just been a really tense situation, not after you've just come from work and your boss getting on your nerves. You want to make sure as much as possible you're as neutral as can be, and that you're in a neutral space. So typically you'll hear a lot that people say have these types of conversation like in the kitchen or in the living room, so that you're not having that difficult conversation, especially if it's around like intimacy and sex in your bedroom, because that can make it a very tense place. And if you're thinking about that when you're supposed to be in the mind frame of being sensual and connecting, it can be difficult to kind of take those two and separate them once you've integrated everything and doing everything in your bedroom. So that's what I mean by a neutral space as well, like the kitchen or the living room, somewhere where you're just being, and it's not associated with the type of conversation that you're having. Number 2 is going to be the I statements. So yes, making sure that anytime you're speaking from your perspective, because that is the only one that you truly know. And again, avoiding the you allows the other person to feel like they're not being attacked, even if you're telling them all of the things that they're doing wrong. By focusing on yourself, it's putting yourself first. So it's not about the other person needing to fix all of these things, but it's about this is the way that I interpret it. This is what I'm seeing. I need to understand this, and that allows the other person to do the same. And hopefully they're doing these things as well. And if not, then you can definitely send them this live and let them know that you would like to have conversations with them. But a therapist and intimacy coach has some suggestions for you guys to have this conversation in a more successful manner. So send them this. Go right ahead and do that. Number 3 is going to be avoid generalizations. No one or nothing is always or never the same way all of the time. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding those words so that we don't discredit what they do. Even if they only did it once, that disproves that they're always one way or that they never do the thing that you want them to do, right? So avoid those altogether so they don't feel attacked, and we can still think pretty clearly enough to come up with a solution that works for everyone. Number 4 is one issue at a time. So they did 100 things wrong. We're still going to focus on the one. Once that one is resolved, then we can move on to the next, and so on and so forth. And then number 5 is going to be about listening to understand rather than listening to reply. So part of that is going to be asking a lot of clarifying questions, and being very focused on that before I even say what my piece is. I want to make sure that I'm asking questions and really understanding and paraphrasing. I know you'll hear a lot about that, making sure that you're paraphrasing so that your sole focus is on getting what they're saying and truly understanding it, not based on what your interpretation of that is, not based on your assumption, but based on what they tell you. And then I do want to go over a bonus, but I wanted to mention to you guys, if you like these small little tips, these are pretty common ones. You might have heard at least most of them before, but I do have a lot more in my workbook. It's the Better Sex, a guide to confidence, relationship satisfaction, and orgasms without faking. If you would like to get that, it is in a link at my bio on Instagram, and you can go ahead and purchase. I have a lot more tips there. So not even just about, like I said, how you communicate, but also about listening and truly understanding and interpreting what someone else is saying to you. So it's a very helpful tool, even if that's the only thing you need out of it. But there's tons more about confidence, about boundaries, more information on communication, like I mentioned, and then there's obviously the intimacy and the sex stuff in there too. So definitely check that out. And kudos to you if you made it this far. Shout out to you. I appreciate you guys. I do want to give you a bonus, and this is something that kind of transformed the way that I go about things. So when we're having difficult times in our relationships, typically we do seek advice, or maybe we go to someone to vent, but we're looking to other people a lot of the times to kind of express ourselves, right? And if we're going to do that, because I know it's a very natural thing to do, I've done it everybody has done it to an extent, right? So a lot of the times it's not a professional. Although it's very helpful if it is, if you have a therapist or a coach, it is very helpful if you do have that external person who is a professional that can give you objective advice. But a lot of times that's not what it is. So if we're to the point where we are seeking external advice or guidance, we want to make sure that there's a few things that are in line. So number one, we want to make sure that this person is someone who is trusted, right? So you obviously, if you're going to tell them your business, you don't want them telling everybody else this business, right? But then on top of that, you want to trust that they value and they are going to honor the relationship. So yes, we have our friends that's going to ride for us regardless, and we are going to be the number one priority. So your partner is automatically going to come second to that, but second to that should be my relationship. So yes, you should look out for me regardless, but you should also be looking out for my relationship. So if I'm coming to you for advice, I need to know that you care about this relationship and that the advice is not going to be, well, you need to leave, you need to go immediately, unless it's something that warrants that, which there's a few things. Abuse, yes, I understand that, saying that person should leave. But if it's not an extreme situation like that, then that shouldn't be the first response of anyone that you're seeking counsel from, advice, or even just venting to. So you want to make sure that you're choosing the appropriate people. And we know who these people are for the most part. So if there's a person who's like, well, he was never good for you anyway, I never liked him. If you know that there's someone like that in your life, that's probably not the person to go to. Another thing to consider is their own personal experiences. So sometimes people are unable to be objective, and you need to know who those people are. So if every time someone is asking for advice, or even if it's just on social media, there's a post, they're always having like a negative view of relationships because they've had a lot of negative experiences in their relationships, that's also probably not a person that you want to talk to, just because you know it's likely going to be negative what they respond. So you want to kind of take those things into consideration. If they don't like your partner already, it's probably not going to be helpful or effective to talk to them about it. So first, you want to do that. Make sure that is in place. Know who this person is. Trust them. Know that they value not only you, but the relationship. And then the third thing, this is what kind of changed the game for me. If I'm going to a friend or a family member about a situation that I'm experiencing within my relationship, what I've started to do is I will tell the situation from my husband's perspective. So when I go to these people, I don't even say like, this is how I feel, this is what he did. I tried my best to explain it from his situation. So this is what he said, this is how he feels about it, this is what he expressed to me, and I start with that. Because sometimes me just explaining it and saying from his perspective, I don't even need them to respond, because I understand it so much more clearly now, because I explained it only from his side, and it makes so much more sense. And so that really changed the game for me. Like whenever my husband and I were going through a really tough time, I switched that around. I started to explain it from his perspective, and it made sense. So even though I didn't agree, I don't think that he handled it well, but understanding where he came from made it more clear why he moved the way that he did and why he would say the things that he said. So I understand my perspective, obviously, because I live it, and I think I have my mind with me at all times, so I get it clearly, very completely. But then I also start to understand his much more. So I think that's another really important thing to try it out. It's not always super easy, especially if you think that the way that they do things is wrong. But instead of thinking of wrong and right, just think of this is your perspective, and people go about things differently. So this is how they see it, this is how they feel about it, this is what they said, and that allows the other person too, especially if this is an outside person, they're going to view the situation in a different way. It's not putting a bad light over them, right? So oh, guess what he did? If I come to you with that energy, you're already knowing, and it's setting it up for them to feel a certain way. So if I can explain his side and his situation, how he feels, what he said to me, that makes it a little bit easier for the other person not to have a negative view on this situation and this other person in your relationship. So that is the bonus. Like I said, it kind of changed everything for me to do that. And now it, like, just in general, I think that I understand my husband a lot better than I did even just like 5 years ago. So definitely try that out. Go ahead and like this if you've made it this far. I appreciate you. Share this, like I said, if you have friends, family, or partner that you want to improve communication with. And don't tell them that they need to do these things, because it's everybody involved needs to do these things in order for the conversation to go well. So don't make it seem like it's a they problem. Like I said, it's I statements. I saw this live and I thought it was really great, so I just wanted to share it. Like, I think everyone should know these things. Don't point any fingers, but share it so that they can get this information as well. Like I said, get the workbook. If you would like more, there's like more than twice as many tips in there. So if communication is really difficult for you, then I definitely suggest getting it. Again, it's in the link in my IG bio. If you have questions or anything, definitely drop them in the comments. And I'm about to get up out of here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday, and I will see you guys later.